Welcome back everyone. In today's session, we are mostly going to be talking about Python functions, and we are covering these four questions in today's session. First is, we'll see what are parameters of the function. Second is what are arguments. Then what are three types of arguments, and what is args and kwargs. Okay. So let's start with first question. What are parameters of functions? Before that, I hope everybody understand the basic fundamental of what are function, how functions are getting created and called, and why do we need functions, right? After that, let me quickly open the notepad. Okay, so here I have opened my notepad and I will simply create a function to add numbers, right? So the keyword is def, then I'll give my function name, which is add numbers, right? And inside that function with proper indentation, and let's say I will just print, sum. Okay, this is simple string. And how do I call this function? Simple. Function name and the round brackets. So first, when Python scans the program, it will scan from top to bottom. It will scan the function. It will create the function in memory. But only when we call the function, then it will execute. That means it will go inside this indented block and it will execute this block. Now here, the intention is to add two or more numbers. Okay, first we'll start with basic two numbers. So this is the basic function which we can see running behind every simple calculator. So if we see here, right, this is the calculator. If I simply do 1 plus 2, and when I press this equal signs, basically it will give me a sum. So basically it will call a function when I click on equal to sign, right, and then perform action and then show the result. So we are just trying to implement the same functionality here in the notepad. Right, first let me try to execute this. Python my demo. It is simply calculating the sum. Now here I want to pass two arguments to that function, so that if we pass any functions or any numbers, basically it will give me the sum of those functions, right? Sum of those numbers, sorry, not functions. So I want to pass, let's say 1, 2 here, right? Now if we are passing this while calling the function, these are known as arguments. So arguments are 1 and 2, right? And to catch this argument while defining the function, we have to write some parameters. So parameters is basically these two values are getting catched in the variables in the form of parameters. So let's say number 1 comma number 2, right? So while calling, what we are passing actually integer, actual values, and where it is getting catched, these arguments are getting catched in number 1 and number 2. So now while defining the function, we have to enter these two variables in the round bracket, and these are known as parameters. Okay, now simply what we can do is we can do number 1 plus number 2. Okay, let's try to execute it now. No, sorry, number 2, not number 3. I'm executing it again. Now I'm getting the sum of these two numbers. Now this function is reusable, so I can pass any values like 4 plus 4, and I'm not touching the function code, right? Function is still valid, so it has given me number 8. Okay, so the basic fundamental is whatever we are passing while calling the function are known as arguments, and while defining the function, we have to define those variables in which the values are getting catched, right? So these variables are known as parameters. Now let's take this example 1, 2. Let's try to check what is the. See, now you must have got this idea, right? What are parameters of the functions? So while defining whatever variables we are creating, these are known as parameters. And what are arguments? While calling the function, whatever numbers we are passing or whatever values we are passing to that function, these are known as arguments. Now we'll see what are the types of arguments. Again, if I go back to this notepad and see these two values, now how Python will know that one should be placed in number 1 variable and 2 should be placed in number 2 variable. How Python will decide, right? So here there is something called as positional arguments. Okay, I will write it here. So while calling the function, I will write calling function, right? While calling the function, if I'm not passing this variable names here, that means it will sequentially put the values according to its parameters. So because we have mentioned first in the first, so it will go into number 1 because it is the first parameter. Second argument will go into second parameter, right, by default. If I do 10 and 20, right, or 20 and 10, right, first argument will by default go to first parameter, second argument by default goes to second parameter, third argument, if there was third argument, it will go to third parameter if it is defined. So because these arguments are getting assigned as per its position, so first to first, second to second, that's why these arguments are known as positional argument. Let's try to execute this program just to check. See, sum is 30, and if I do print number 1, just number 1 is number 1, colon should be inside the string because it is string. See, number 1 is 20, number 2 is 10. If I swap the position, it will get changed. So now 10 will go to number 1 again. See here, number 1 is 10, number 2 is 20. So it is purely based on what is the position of the argument which we are passing, right? So this is known as positional argument. Now, what if we want to explicitly mention that 10 should always go to number 2? Let's say here it is 0. So 0 should always go to number 2. Either it is at first position or second position. How we can clarify that, right? So here the second type of argument comes, which is known as keyworded argument. Keyworded argument, right? Here, along with while calling the function, because it is argument, right? While calling the function, we can explicitly use this variable's names, like number 1 should go, 0 should go in number 1 and 20 should go in number 2. Now here it is not just position. Here we have defined keywords as well. So I'll just close this out. See, number 1 is 0, number 2 is 20, right? Now what I want is, even if 0 is at number 1 or first position, I want to assign it to number 2. How we can do it? Simply do this. Number 2, number 1. So now 0 will get assigned to number 2. Wherever is the number 2, regardless of its position of parameter. And 20 will get assigned to number 1, regardless of position. Now let's check. See, number 1 is 20, number 2 is 0. Because we have explicitly mentioned that 0 should go into number 2 parameter and 20 should go in number 1 parameter. So this is something called as keyworded argument. Now there is third type of argument, that let's say I haven't given number 2, right? There are 2 parameters which this function is accepting, and while calling it, we are just passing only one argument, right? What will happen in this case? In this case, the function will break, saying that it is type error, addNums function missing one argument, which is number 2. Number 2 argument is missing, right? So in this case, if I don't want to pass, so let's take again the example of calculator, right? So if I do again online calculator, see, I do 1, right? I do plus, I don't do anything. See again, the answer is 0. It is not breaking the program. Or again, if I simply type 1 and equal to, right? It is not asking for 2 numbers. It will simply give whatever the result is. So by default, it is assuming that number 2 is 0, right? So if number 2 is not provided, by default, assume number 2 equal to 0. And this is called as default argument. This is called as default argument. So now here, if I pass just 20, because it is positional argument now, 20 will go into number 1, and we are not passing any second argument, right? But here we have already defined, if number 2 is not passed by arguments, then assume it 0, right? So it will not break the program. It will by default consider number 2 is 0. Again, even if keyworded argument, if I do number 1 equal to 20 or number 1 equal to 50, just for variation, see, number 1 is 50, number 2 is 0. But if we pass number 2 as well from arguments, right, it will prioritize whatever we have passed, which is 10, and we are getting the sum. But if it not passed, only then use the default argument, right? So these are 3 types of argument. What 3 types we have learned? Positional argument, keyworded argument, and default argument. Now here, the next question is, what is args and kwargs, right? So here we have to understand again with this calculator example. So this function can take one argument. It can take 2 arguments. If you see 1 plus 2, we are passing 2 numbers. It is giving me the sum, right? Also, I'll clear it out. It can also accept 3 arguments, and it is giving me the sum. One more time, 4 arguments. 3 plus 3, 4 arguments. If I click equal to, the same function, same addition function is working with number of arguments we are passing. It is not static argument that you have to only pass 2 argument or 3 argument. Here, if you try to pass 3 arguments, 1, 2, 3, the function will break. The function will break saying that only 2 arguments it is expecting, because in the definition we are saying only 2 arguments. Now what if we want to pass 3 arguments, right? What if we want to pass 3 arguments? Here we have to pass one more, right? And again here we have to do number 3. That means we have changed the function and added additional parameter here, right? 6. Now it is working fine. But now while calling the function, I want one more. I want to pass one more argument, right? Here again I have to go back to function and add one more parameter, number 4. Here also one more, number 4. That means what's happening is we have to continuously modify the function, and this function is not reusable anymore. We have to continuously upgrade the function, right? Upgrade the parameters, number of parameters of the function. So in this case, if there are variable parameters, we don't know how many variable arguments. If there are variable arguments, then what we can do, right? It can be 1 argument, it can be 2 argument, it can be 3 argument, it can be any argument. So in such cases, instead of passing all the variables, what we can pass is star args, right? And if you simply print what are args, it will give you list of all the arguments. See here, it will give you tuple of all the arguments. Now here, if you simply want to add this, what we can do, we can use for loop for I in set, this set, right, args, right? Put sum, start at the start it will be 0, then sum equal to sum plus I, and print sum. See here, because we are getting variable arguments, see what is happening. I'm passing only 2 arguments, so sum will be 3, right? In args, what will be in args? Let's try to print it. Args will be set which is having 1 and 2, and from that set we are simply doing the for loop, and we are calculating the sum and printing the sum. So printing the sum is 3. Now what will happen if I add one more argument? Do I need to change the function? No, it will automatically get added in this tuple, args tuple, right? Let's see here, automatically got added, the argument got added, and we do not have to change or modify the function. Now this function is fully reusable, just like our calculator function, right? And we can pass any number of arguments now. See, 4 number of arguments, 5, etc. Right? So if there are variable number of arguments, we are not sure how many arguments that function is going to accept, then in that case we can use star args, which will basically give you a tuple of argument values, right? So this is known as args, star args. Star is very important. Star represents the set of arguments, right? Args can be anything. Args can be, you can put your name as well. Let's say demo. This will work as well, right? But this star is very important. This represents that you can have variable number of arguments. You can catch variable number of arguments, right? So this is args. Now, if instead of star, if you do double star and key w args, right? Let me tell you first what will it give, right? So now instead of simple numbers, right? If we want to pass keyworded arguments, but again variable, it can be 1 keyworded argument, it can be 2 keyworded arguments, 3 or so on, right? Let's say argument 1 equal to a, argument 2 equal to 2. Now I want to pass 2 arguments in these functions, right? Now here, if you see the keywords, kwargs, right? It will give you a dictionary. So previously it was giving you a set of arguments. Now it is giving you a dictionary in which the keys represent the keyword, right? And the values represent the actual argument value which you are passing. And it can be variable. Now a3 equal to 4, a3 equal to 3. See this thing, you are getting the dictionary. Now once you got all the arguments in the function in the form of dictionary, then you can separate out keys and values and perform operation over it. So this is basically args and keyworgs concept.